It's easy to be seen, but being seen is not the same thing as being known, is it? See, this is the wound that doesn't really show up so often. It's the wound that hides behind polished smiles or curated feeds and the quiet pressure to always be on. It's the wound of being praised, but you're never held. You're visible, but you're not really witnessed. And you're liked by many, but you're known by no one. So we begin this series here, not in the agony of abandonment per se, but in this pain of invisibility in plain sight. See, this is not a loneliness that's born of isolation. It's a kind of loneliness that lives in rooms that are full of people, that lives in the applause, that lives in the connection, that is just thin enough to touch, but never deep enough for you to land on confidently. It's the kind of loneliness that hides behind 1,000 likes, the kind that becomes harder to name the more that we're admired, the more the people celebrate us, and especially for what we do. And the more that it hurts that they have no idea who we truly are. And so we start to feel like we're ghosts in our own lives. We're visible, we're echoed, we're recognized, but we're never really met. So we learn early how to be liked, and we learn what version of ourselves the world finds easiest to love, and we adjust, and we adapt, and we become palatable. And the more we succeed at being likable, the more we wonder whether the real version of us could actually survive in the spotlight. So we keep the layers, and we polish the roughness, and we lead with laughter or intellect or charm. And we stay interesting, but not too intense, right? We show glimpses of truth, but never too much. Just enough to seem authentic. Never enough to actually be truly vulnerable. And people love us for it. Right? But on the inside, we know something is off. Because it's not actually us that they're loving, it's their version that we've learned to perform. And the applause, instead of feeling affirming, it actually begins to sting. Because every compliment feels like this celebration of our disguise. And the more that we're seen in that way, the more alone we feel in our own truth. See, this is the wound that rarely gets named because it's rarely validated. I mean, how could someone so admired be so lonely? How could someone with a circle around them still feel completely unknown? But the truth is, this wound lives everywhere. It lives in leaders and in caretakers, in artists, in those who've learned how to earn love through performance, in those who are constantly read, but rarely read deeply. See, there's a kind of exhaustion that builds when we become our own PR team. When every room that we enter is asking for the version of us that's easiest to digest. And it's not just about the exhaustion, it's also, there's a dehumanizing element to this. Because if no one actually sees us for our whole truths, then even when we're surrounded, we'll still feel isolated and alone. The hardest part, though, is how quiet this pain can be. I mean, it doesn't cry out like heartbreak. It doesn't collapse like grief does. It drips slowly and consistently over time. And so we tell ourselves that we should be grateful, right? After all, we're included, right? We're invited, we're liked. But gratitude doesn't really quiet that pain of being misunderstood. It doesn't fill the gap between performance and presence. And it doesn't really touch the parts of us that have never really been named. And so we carry it alone and silently, because what language do we even use for this kind of a thing? I mean, how do you say, I'm surrounded by people, but no one actually knows the sound of my silence? Or how do you say I'm praised for what I offer, but no one ever thinks to check in on what I need? Or how do you say I feel safest when I'm liked, but most alive when I'm real, and I just can't figure out how to be both of these things? There's a recent social study that researchers found the number of close confidence that people report has dropped by like more than half in a single generation. So back in 1990, the average person would say that they had at least 3 people that they could confide in. But today, in 2025, that number is barely 1. And here's the real twist. Like, social media connections are at an all-time high, aren't they? We are visible everywhere, but we're known nowhere. And so we retreat further into the roles that we play, and we post, and we entertain, and we curate, and we keep it light, and we keep it moving. Because staying likable has in essence become our shield. It's become our way of surviving in a world that doesn't often know how to hold depth. But what we long for is so much deeper than just approval. See, we long to be felt, to be understood without having to explain, to be known not for how well we perform, but how fully we show up. Seeing, being liked is the easy part. We've mastered that. We know how to read a room, right? We know how to say just the right things. We know how to soften the truth just enough that it becomes palatable. And we know how to, in essence, downplay the pain. We know how to be useful, and how to be generous, and how to be agreeable. But being known, this is much harder. Because to be known, we first of all have to be honest. And to be honest, we have to risk being too much. We have to risk being too intense, or too quiet, or too messy, or too raw. And most of us have learned very early on that too muchness gets punished. So we learn containment. We become small enough to fit into other people's comfort zones. And we become agreeable, just enough to be invited, but guarded enough just so that we're never truly exposed. And every time we shrink for this connection, we're in essence leaving a part of ourselves behind. And this is subtle, but over time it's cumulative. Until one day we look around at all this life that we've built, and we realize that it's full of people who love us, but no one who actually knows us. And that's when that sense of loneliness gets even louder. Because the more successful we become at being liked, the more impossible it feels to break the spell. I mean, how do you start telling the truth once you've built this entire identity on being easy to be around? How do you let people in when your whole sense of belonging has in essence been tied to staying in the people-pleasing mode? This fear is real. I mean, if they saw the unfiltered version of you, would they still stay? So we keep showing up in the pieces that are measured and moderated and manageable. And it works until it doesn't. Until the cost becomes too high. Until we realize that being liked at the expense of being known isn't really true connection. It's actually quiet, but a beautiful exile. And this exile doesn't look like isolation. It looks more like overbooking. It looks like busyness. It looks like a calendar that's full of commitments and a heart that hasn't really felt safe in months. So we stay surrounded so that we don't have to feel how unseen we really are. And we master the small talk. We're experts at group chat. We make jokes that keep the conversation fun and light. And we share updates that keep it surface level, right? We give people, in essence, a glimpse of our lives, but just enough to to maintain that closeness, but never enough to risk depth. And somewhere in the middle of all this activity that we're doing, we start to disappear. Because when you go long enough without being known, you in essence begin to forget what it feels like to actually be real. And when realness becomes foreign, connection becomes performative. Love becomes conditional in this setting, and loneliness inevitable. This is the cost, if you will, of self-protection, of confusing visibility for belonging, of exchanging our truth for approval. And yet, there's a reason I think that we do all this. That's because the first time we showed up in our unfiltered zone, someone did not know how to stay. Because the first time we let someone in, they used it against us. Because somewhere along the way, we learned that being real was a liability. So we recalibrated and we became what was safest. We became what was celebrated. And in so doing, we lost the thread of our full self. We didn't stop existing, we just stopped being seen. We became known by name, but not really by our essence. We became loved for the idea of us, but not for the full aliveness that's inside all of us. There's this particular kind of grief that comes with being misrecognized. Not hated or rejected, just misunderstood. Perpetually mistaken for someone who's more together than we truly are. Someone who's more happy, someone who's more confident or more fine. And it's this grief of being celebrated while you're feeling like you're drowning, of being everyone's favorite, while slowly you're forgetting who you actually are on the inside. Of being the person that everyone assumes is okay. And so no one, in essence, ever asks if you're not okay. This is what that wound is that hides behind the compliments. It says, you're always so strong, and I love your energy, and you're doing amazing. And in response, we nod, we smile, we say, thank you. Because correcting them would mean that we're breaking the illusion. And we don't know if we can really afford that. So we stay quiet and we stay liked and we keep carrying the weight of being unseen. But something eventually breaks. Not loudly usually or dramatically, but undeniably. The mask begins to itch, the smile starts to feel heavy, the inbox becomes unbearable, the version of us that was once so easy to manage becomes to feel more like a prison. So we start to crave something different. Not more admiration, and not more attention, not even more people per se. Just one person who sees through all of this, who can look past the pleasantness and past the polish, past the public image that we've created. Someone who isn't really clapping for our performance, but instead is holding space for our truth. That kind of connection, is rare. It's possible, but it's rare. And it begins not when they find us, but when we choose to stop hiding. To stop hiding isn't always loud though. Sometimes it's as simple as pausing before we give the default answer that we were about to. Sometimes it's saying, I'm not okay, when we usually say, I'm good. Sometimes it's sharing the story that we've never really told. Not to be dramatic, but to be real. This is what it means, I think, to return to ourselves. To come back into relationship with the parts where we've exiled ourselves in the name of likability. To start building a life where presence matters far more than our polished exterior, where being felt matters more than being followed, where depth becomes the compass and not the detour. Because the truth is this, we don't need everyone to understand us, right? We don't need massive reach. We don't need to keep up the brand. What we do need is sacred spaces where we can feel felt. Spaces where our silence isn't necessarily awkward, where our sadness isn't inconvenient, where our bigness isn't too much, where we're not just liked, but we're also known. And that's the kind of life that starts with one choice. And that's to stop building an identity around who it's safest to be, but instead to start anchoring our identity on who we actually are. So, let that be the invitation this month. With every wound that I'm going to name through the course of these episodes, with every silence that we're going to break, with every mask that we choose that we're going to drop, let's together move closer to who we truly are. And the closer we are to ourselves, the easier it becomes to let others meet the true us. Not the polished version of us, not the performative side that we've been presenting, but the one who's been waiting quietly to be seen. Let this series this month be your space to return to yourself and to your truth, and to the version of you that doesn't chase the applause, because it's finally learning to sit with itself in presence. See, the wound of being liked but never known is not shameful. It's actually sacred. It reveals in essence how deeply we long for intimacy and how ready we are to live in it. So this time, don't perform your way through. Don't hide behind the language of healing, but let yourself be seen. Because being known will not come from how well you're liked. It will come instead from how courageously and bravely you stop disappearing in rooms where you've already arrived. I'd love to hear your thoughts as we embark on this series. Let me know in the comments below. See you in tomorrow's episode.